please. And I'm going to share my screen. Because it's right 4 o'clock, right on time. What happened? What happened here? Tell me you can see my slide that says welcome to session 5.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great, great. Well, let's get started then. It is 4 o'clock or maybe 1 minute after. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to session 5. And we're going to hear about high-valued irrigated crop production practices in the Canadian prairies. Before I introduce Trevor, just a thing we're going to try to move forward on regarding questions and discussion. So we'd like to give all of our presenters the opportunity to present their entire presentation that they've spent a lot of time getting ready and getting it to us in advance. And so we thank everybody for that. So during the presentation, if a question comes up, please record it in the chat. After the presentation, once we've kind of gone through and addressed all of the questions that may be in the chat, if you think of another question, just raise your hand figuratively or use the reaction tab there to raise your hand. You will be recognized because you'll be placed in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, and then you can we'll recognize you, unmute you, and then ask that question. So today we're switching from dryland crops, which we heard from Gruber on Monday, to irrigated crops today. And I've been through Trevor's presentation, and I think you're going to be overwhelmed by it again. A lot of great information. We're going to touch on the history of irrigation, the area of irrigated land in Canada and in the West, talk about some high value crops, because obviously irrigation is more suited to high value crops because you need to minimize the impact of moisture or drought. And then he's going to touch on a number of crops and the agronomy associated with them. Potatoes and sugar beets, dry beans, mint, which I find interesting, corn, and forage barley. So with me today, I have Brian Carnahan. He's our Zoom host, so he's kind of managed things behind the scenes for us. So thank you, Brian. But today's presenter is Trevor Deering. He grew up in Hill Spring, Alberta, and I meant to look it up on the map where that is because I thought I've been to a lot of places in the province, but I don't recall where it is. So maybe he can share that with us when he comes on. He has worked on several farms. He has his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Agriculture from the University of Lethbridge. And since about 4 years now, he's been an agronomist at Farming Smarter, and that's the same organization that Gruber works for. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'll hand it over to Trevor to share with us about irrigated crops. Trevor.
Thank you, Rick. I'll just start sharing my screen here. Yeah, thank you for that great introduction. Just first, so yeah, I do work with Farming Smarter, and I've been here for 3 years. And I don't know if I would call myself an agronomist completely. I do have my certified crop advisor certificate, but It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm an agronomist, but I do contract research here at Farming Smarter. So anyone that wants to do their research with us, usually they have their own idea. They come to us and we'll perform that for them. And this year, my program is really healthy. So hopefully we can have a good year. And kind of like what Gurbir said yesterday, or on Tuesday there, Monday, sorry. You know, here at Farming Smarter, we like to say that we're a jack of all trades, but a master of none. You know, we do a lot, and it's hard sometimes to really be a master of things. But we partner with the Alberta government, Alberta agriculture, and the universities and colleges here, and they help us with some of that mastery of things. But hopefully, as I go through here, I can do justice to some of my topics, especially the crops. Like there could be a lot of information, and someone could go an hour or more on each of those crops. But I just kind of want to give an overview of things and give you a picture of irrigated cropping in the Canadian prairies. So that is my topic. And I just want to tell you just a little bit more about myself too. Like, so I did grow up in a small town of Hill Spring, and it's on the southwest of Alberta. And I don't know if you guys have heard of Waterton National Park, but it's down in the corner there, not far from the US border, about an hour from the US border. I think the town only has about 300 residents, but it was a beautiful town to grow up in. I did not grow up on a farm, but I grew up around farming and did work on a dairy and some other farms doing odds and ends. And it wasn't until a couple years out of high school that I went back to college and wanted to actually do something with my life that I found agriculture, and I haven't looked back since. Yeah, just I feel like there's so much opportunity and awesome things happening in agriculture, and I've been proven right on that, especially being with Farming Smarter. One of the reasons why I got into agriculture was to help farmers farm better, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So I couldn't be happier. And I feel like I wanted to tell you about myself a little bit because I feel like that's happening more and more, where non-agriculture kids or farm kids are getting into agriculture, and there's so many different opportunities in agriculture that I think there's lots of avenues that you can go. And just a couple of pictures there. So we grew up right by the Rocky Mountains, and the one mountain there is called Chief Mountain, which is actually in the United States, but just a beautiful area. And it's called Hill Spring because there's a big hill there as well. So, and I took some of these pictures on the weekend. I got really, really happy with my camera because I knew I was going to be doing this presentation. So you'll see some of the pictures I took this weekend. First off, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Gurbir was saying, to talk about our climate and how dry we are, and kind of give you guys a picture of just what it's like here. So Alberta is classified as BSK climate type, which is cold semi-arid. It receives precipitation below the potential evapotranspiration, and it receives more rain than a desert, but it is still pretty dry, and we are characterized with hot, dry summers with cold winters and variable snow patterns. So we're kind of sitting around that 400 to 500 millimeters of rain annually. So we're pretty dry. The image there that I'm showing is from average annual precipitation from 1980 to 2010. So that pattern kind of shifts a little bit here and there, but basically we are fairly dry, especially in the Lethbridge and the Southern Alberta region. You can see some of Saskatchewan there as well. It's quite dry areas. You get into Manitoba, they get quite a bit more precipitation. And just to kind of give a picture of where we're sitting right now, this is percent of normal soil moisture on February 28th. And we're kind of sitting within that 60 to 85% of normal. So we're a little dry. We had a hot and dry year last year, quite a severe drought, and we hope that we do better this year and we receive especially more spring rains, because that's what we really rely on here for our soils to recharge their moisture. And right now we're warming up. We actually did some seeding yesterday for some ultra early trials. The soil was a little moist, which is good, but it's drying up pretty fast. We have crazy winds here, and today was no exception. I think we're sitting probably about 50 to 75 km/h winds, somewhere in there. And yeah, so hopefully it's not as dry as last year. We don't want another drought. And just another kind of fun fact there, Lethbridge is called the Windy City for a reason. We do get high winds that seem to dry things out quite quickly. And again, I just wanted to show the soil map here, just to give you a sense of the pattern there and the types of soil we have. There is agriculture production in all of those soil zones, but in the black and the brown soil zones is where there's highly productive agriculture happening, especially in the irrigation districts. And you can see the Canadian Shield up in northern Saskatchewan and Manitoba. That is not really productive, lots of rocks and lots of lakes up in the northern regions of those provinces. So Winnipeg has less area for highly productive agriculture, but they do have really productive soils and lots of irrigation as well. That makes them productive in agriculture. And hopefully I can give a brief but informative history of irrigation. Irrigation has been going on for about 130 years about. So there's quite a bit of change and stuff that's been happening, but hopefully I can do justice to this brief history. And I just have to move my thing here. Yeah, so basically there would be no heavy row cropping in Southern Alberta without irrigation. You know, there would be grazing and maybe some dry land, but the settlers had a tough time in the arid climate of the area. The first major irrigation efforts in Alberta started in the 1880s in the Milk River and St. Mary rivers. William Pierce, an inspector of Dominion land agencies, championed the need for irrigation when he visited Southern Alberta in 1883. Actually, in Calgary, he visited, just north of Lethbridge here. And in 1885, he gained a platform for voicing his thoughts. Charles Card, part of the Mormon community, attempted the task of constructing irrigation in Cardston, and that was one of the first major attempts. And with the Mormon community, there was quite a large community that was immigrating into Canada or into Alberta as well. So there was a large group of them, and they started construction of towns and stuff. So Cardston was actually named after the Cards. Yeah, there were some struggles with Cards' efforts due to cost and difficulty of construction, and others were reluctant to starting irrigation. So he didn't really have much support. And this was due to optimism that the drought period that was happening would subside, and which it did in 1890. And this stalled irrigation construction and efforts going forward. Pierce did background studies for the government sometime later and did gain their support, and most importantly, some of their financial support. that did work, and the government went through many stages of trying to get things working. There's just a lot of little pieces of history there I'm just going to skip over, but Pierce's advocacy to the government, the Mormons, and the Galts, who owned lots of railway company land, worked to finance and build the St. Mary River irrigation project. Canada won the right to use the St. Mary water from the United States, because that river actually has its headwaters in the United States. And eventually agreed to divert water upstream from the St. Mary rivers in the United States and divert into the Milk River for more stable water supply in the Milk River throughout the year, because the Milk River tends to dry up in the late summer. So there was much tension between the United States and Canada about this, but we seem to have made strong partnerships and got over that, and we work together now. From there, large irrigation infrastructure has been built in Alberta, and maybe I can touch on a little bit of kind of where we're at now. So just as what I talked about there, I just wanted to give you a map, kind of give you a reference for what we're talking about here. So I grew up down, can you guys see my cursor? Yeah, so I grew up kind of down in this area here. And so the St. Mary River starts in the US in the mountains and comes down and goes through or beside Lethbridge here. And all of these other rivers also join up to the South Saskatchewan River and flow into Saskatchewan. And the Milk River kind of comes into Southern Alberta here and then flows back out into the United States. So they were able to divert water into the Milk River from here and have more stable water there. There was at one point, I think, a time when our government or people in Alberta dammed up the Milk River and didn't want water going back into the United States. And there was all sorts of other tensions that happened, but there's definitely, it takes partnership and work for the US and Alberta to work together to maintain irrigation on both sides. So that leads us to today. We have 13 irrigation districts in Alberta, and a district is a cooperation that operates under the authority of the Alberta Irrigation District Act, whose primary purpose is to convey and deliver water through irrigation works, divert and use quantities of water within the terms of its license, and to construct, operate, and maintain irrigation works. So the irrigation districts distribute water licenses under the Waters Act. And the South Saskatchewan River Basin has a moratorium right now on those water rights due to large allocation of the water that's flowing through those rivers, and that we still need to actually give or let go into the South Saskatchewan River, because we can't just use up all the water. So that includes 10 districts out of the 13. So quite a few that are limited on issuing new licenses. One of the good things is that they can still trade licenses and those kind of things. And there are some private districts too within there, which make up, I think, roughly 100,000 hectares of irrigated land just as private districts. So we're talking about large acres. There's 1.73 million acres of irrigation in Alberta, providing 3.6 billion to annual provincial GDP, and that was from 2015. And they're using 60 to 65% of all water consumed on average. So you guys can kind of get a sense for the scale of these operations and the amount of land that we're dealing with in Alberta. Yeah, I don't have statistics on like the amount of conveyance, the kilometers of pipe and stuff like that we have, but it's quite significant. So we have a number of dams that will dam up a river and store that water, and then we can release it when we need. So this is actually pictures of the St. Mary's Dam that I took on the weekend. Then we also have canals. So we have lined canals and we have earth canals. The lined canals obviously have a liner in them that to stop seepage. Earth canals do not. And we also have like cemented canals as well. And there's been a big push in the last few years to put in pipelines, water pipelines, because as you can imagine, these open canals allow a lot of evaporation, and they take a lot of work to maintain. So there's been a large efforts in moving into pipelines that don't have as much evaporation and don't need as much repair. And there are large efforts going on to repair the infrastructure that we do have and maintain it. So the government is still putting lots of money towards maintaining this infrastructure and maintaining our irrigation networks. Yeah, so we'll move on to some of the statistics about irrigated land in Alberta. And so there are seven provinces that are on this graph that we're comparing, and these are the major provinces that have irrigation. I just wanted to point out how much irrigation Alberta has. We account for approximately 70% of all irrigation in Canada, in Alberta. So it's quite a large number, and it is reflected in these graphs here. You can see British Columbia also has a bunch, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Yeah, and that was all the irrigated acres. So we'll move into some of the crops in particular. So for field crops, again, Alberta has a ton of field crops, and not really comparative to any other province. And you can also see Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So the prairie provinces have quite a bit of field crops under irrigation. And your field crops would be like your wheat, canola, those kind of crops. And if we move into forage crops, again, Alberta, lots of forage crops, BC and Saskatchewan as well. So that'd be for feed, like Timothy hay and those kind of crops. Vegetable crops, Alberta drops down a little bit, and we move over more into like Ontario and Quebec and BC. And these numbers are from 2018 to 2020. And hopefully I can kind of touch on that too when I talk about my crops. So that would be like potatoes and those kind of crops. When we move into fruit crops, Alberta basically has none. And we see that British Columbia has a lot of fruit crops. Quebec has a lot of fruit crops. So that's just one crop that we don't have. Our environment doesn't really permit us to in many cases. And it just doesn't register with this. Okay, now we're going to move into hopefully a fun portion of my one of the funner portions. So I'm going to put up some pictures. I'll ask everyone to unmute and see if you can guess the type of crop that I'm going to show you. And hopefully this works out good, but I encourage you to unmute and to actually try to give an answer if you can. I'm going to give one picture that is going to be more hard in my mind, and then hopefully another picture that's going to be less hard. So what do you guys think this one is? Anyone?
Those beets?
Yeah,
Sugar
those are
beets?
beets. Yeah, sugar beets for sure. So that's the easier one. So those beets are a root crop and they grow into the soil. What do we got here? That bottom right picture.
Potatoes?
Oh, those are potatoes for sure. That's the easy picture here. Awesome. I was hoping not just one person would answer, but we'll see. I can move through these pretty quick too. So what's this one that we got here?
Corn?
Corn.
Yeah, that's corn. Good job. And there's my easy picture, corn. And this one here.
It's mind.
Sorry, what's that?
It's mind.
Nope.
Beans.
Yeah, beans. Yeah. Awesome. Oh, you guys are doing pretty good so far. I was wondering how this was going to go. Oh, now I got so many pictures going. And what do you guys think this crop is?
Well,
That was close. It's barley. And that one was even a tougher one because it is hard to tell barley from wheat, but good job. And this one. This is one of the interesting ones that I have.
That's
That
the mint.
one, I couldn't really find any good. Yeah, it is mint. Yeah,
Mint.
for sure. I couldn't really find any good, easy pictures. And this one here.
Hemp?
Yeah, that one's hemp. Awesome. Only a couple more here. I think this is the last test. You guys didn't know you're going to be tested today, hey? Such a tough test too.
Is that one canola?
Yeah, that one's canola. Yeah. The yellow picture would definitely give it away. Awesome. So now, hopefully, like I was saying, hopefully I can do justice on some of these crops in particular. Like I said, there's so much information on each crop, and to be an expert in them, I'm sure an expert could talk for a couple hours on even just an individual crop. Yeah, and I have some funny pictures like this. So the one picture there is from Vauxhall, and that's actually like a large statue of potatoes, which is always fun to drive by. Alberta has all sorts of statues like that. So just kind of a rough geography. Potatoes are growing more in the Tabor area here. So more east of Lethbridge and more north. So this is where Vauxhall is. That's where that potato statue is. So kind of more east of Lethbridge here, where they're a little warmer, have a little longer growing season. And as you can see, all of those circles there, lots of irrigation. And right here at this Chin location here, there is one of our major potato growers in the area. And there's actually a McCain factory there. So a potato processor right in the area. Yeah, so we'll kind of get into agronomy of potatoes a little bit. And you'll kind of probably see some similarities between the crops, right? Like there's certain things that we want to think about when we're growing each of these crops. And so there's quite a bit of overlap. And yeah, so hopefully you can notice that, and I can hopefully get into that a little bit. So rotation of potatoes is very important because of diseases that can affect the tubers. And most guys, you want to really rotate at least 3 years, but I think guys are even trying to push that. The disease seems to stay in the soil. So 3 to 5 years, probably more onto that 5-year rotation if possible, to avoid some of the buildup of those diseases. And some of the pictures up there, you can see up in the top left corner is potato wart. I think that one's more in Eastern Canada, like PEI, but I thought that was a good picture. And there's also bacterial ring rot that impacts that tuber. And there's soft rot as well. Yeah. So that's one major reason to rotate. And it can get difficult to rotate these crops because the area around Tabor and whatnot, like there's only so much land, but it is good and important to rotate for those diseases. We'll get into soil preparation. So that's another Another thing you guys might notice through these is on these irrigated lands, lots of the time the soil needs to be prepared for some of these specialty crops. Potatoes is probably one of the more intrusive crops to grow because the soil needs to be prepared so much. So you can see they have hills there. Depending on the soil type and the field, there might need to be cultivation before hilling. And then they'll come in with a machine that will hill, usually done in the fall. And when they do it in the fall, they'll also try to put down some nutrients, like some nitrogen. And then in the spring, they can come and just plant their potatoes, put down some more nitrogen. Yeah, and then sometimes also they will hill in season to put the soil around the plant so those tubers aren't exposed to the air. Yeah. For nitrogen, it's estimated that they need about 6.5 pounds of nitrogen for every ton of crop harvested. On average, there's about farmers can do about 15 tons per acre in Alberta, which equates to about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The fertility of potatoes can get quite complicated in season too. Lots of guys will take tissue samples and try to assess where that crop is at and if they need more nutrients, more nitrogen at one point versus the other. Yeah, because they're really trying, the goal is to really produce a nice potato that can go to market. So they really want to try to manage that intensively. And sorry for this kind of gross table, but I just kind of wanted to show like, this is some of the recommendations that are out there for fertilizers. And if you have really low background nitrogen, you're probably going to target that 130 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So you can be in the high end of that, or you could be more in the lower end and normal kind of 100, 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Yeah. One of the problems with potatoes and working the soil as much as is needed is soil erosion. And I don't think this was a potato field that I took a picture of. I think the one on the left was actually corn or something like that. But I just wanted to bring that up as not only are there diseases and insects that can impact the crop, but soil erosion is another major factor. And hopefully this makes you hungry, because it definitely makes me hungry whenever I look at this one. So like I was talking about the end use of those potatoes, and there's a few different end uses. We have fries, so there's a McCain factory, like I said, next to some of the big potato producers here, and they take in a lot of potatoes for frying. And we also have Lamb Weston and Cavendish in the area as well, so two other big potato producers. So variety selection for those end uses is important. Different potatoes will perform differently. So there's boiling, there's mashing, there's baking of potatoes. So there's different varieties that are best for each of those, and also for frying and chipping as well. So I know at the McCain factory, they have really intensive inspections of those potatoes, making sure that the fries that they're frying actually look good, right? Like McDonald's wants a fry that looks golden and fresh and beautiful, right? So they don't want to have imperfections in those. Same with the chips too. Yeah. So there's a whole back end there of actually getting these potatoes to market and the uses. Another part of that is storage. So once they harvest these potatoes, not all of the potatoes go to the processor right away. They just can't handle that volume for one. So these farmers will construct these large bunkers to house the potatoes. And fun fact, I worked for one of the companies that would do the insulation of these, and it would be spray foam. So these buildings are insulated very well, and they also have like a humidity and temperature section in there. So like this whole part of the building here is dedicated to humidity and temperature regulation of these potatoes, and it needs to be controlled accurately and monitored so that those potatoes don't rot. Yeah, so some of the infrastructure that these farmers need is quite expensive and intensive. But then what if they can store them good, they'll be taken out of storage when the producer wants them, and they'll be sorted. They have some optical sorting equipment, and they also have lots of employees as well to sort these potatoes and make sure that they're sending good potatoes to the producer. And so as you can imagine, I didn't quite get into all of the diseases and stuff, but there are some issues that can happen in storage. And again, if they're not maintained properly, you could lose whole bins of these, right? And it's not just a few potatoes, it's a lot of potatoes that could be lost. So storage is a huge part, and there's a lot of jobs that are created just and a lot of time spent just on storing these potatoes. Awesome. Hopefully you learned some about potatoes. So we'll get into sugar beets next. So sugar beets are a beet that has a high sugar content, and that sugar can be extracted in a very complex process. I've toured the one sugar factory, Rogers factory, in Tabor, and it's quite complex. Yeah, so that's definitely why it's high value, making sugar. And again, this is exactly the same map as the potatoes. Sugar beets are grown. Like I said, there's a Rogers sugar plant in Tabor, and the acres of the sugar beets are highly controlled so that the sugar plant can produce the right amount of sugar with the right amount of sugar beets. So most of those sugar beets are grown around the Tabor to Bow Island, Vauxhall kind of area. Oh, and sugar beets are increasing in popularity too, with growers, just giving another crop for rotations and that high value that they can make profits on. Alberta grows over 80% of Canada's sugar beets, and this is mainly in the Tabor area for Lantic or Rogers sugar. And again, so seedbed is crucial for sugar beets. So because they're a tuber, or because they're a root vegetable, the tilth of the soil, or the texture and the fluffiness of that soil is important. So lots of times these fields will also be tilled depending on the texture of the soil. So more of a clay soil would probably need to be tilled for sure. Getting to a more of a sandy soil, not so much. Row crop planters are used on 18 to 20 inch row spacing, and they target 30,000 to 40,000 plants per acre. I think some guys have also been trying and moving into more of a no-till planter, less tillage, less disturbance of the soil. Again, probably dependent more on soil conditions and capabilities of the farmers and their equipment. Rotation is also important. Following cereals has proven to be beneficial for the crop. Those cereals are probably taking less nutrients and stuff from the ground that the beets are wanting. Yeah, one thing that I found was they're picky nitrogen eaters. Yeah, and on average, farmers can produce 26 tons per acre. which they need about 150 pounds of N per acre. So kind of in that higher, but more typical nitrogen needs like the field crops. Oh, and they're picky N eaters because too much N or too little N, they will start to react to that and not grow so healthy. Pest control, weeds, like other crops too, are a big problem, and then need to be controlled. There are Roundup resistant varieties, so farmers can use Roundup, and that's one chemical that's utilized heavily, but I think there are other chemicals that can be used. One thing for rotations is the farmers don't like to grow Roundup ready canola before growing the beets because they are also Roundup ready, and getting volunteer canola in there is a pain, and the producers don't like to have foreign seeds in the crop as well. So they try to make sure that they don't have any canola grown in those fields. And I assume they probably don't like to grow canola at all if they're growing sugar beets, because it is a more high value crop. They also are susceptible to some diseases, so seedling blights, root rots, and foliar diseases. So there's Aphanomyces, Rhizoctonia, and powdery mildew. Yeah. And also the canopy is quite thick as well. And with lots of irrigation on them, that there'll be lots of humidity in that canopy that could produce some foliar diseases as well, like white mold and stuff like that. Insects too can be a problem. We do have wireworms and root maggots in some of these areas. Wireworms, not so much, but it's in some areas they're quite patchy, and sometimes those root maggots. And I assume there are chemical controls for the diseases as well, and probably more for the insects is important to have seed treatments on those seeds to keep those insects away. Yeah, also with the sugar beets there too. So they can, I think you've seen in the one picture, there was big piles of them. So they can, when they harvest them, they can leave them in big piles, and they get some freezing, and there's some waste that goes on, but lots of the time those piles will insulate themselves, and then they can just bring in their loaders and load them into the plant. So lots of the time here, you'll see just these big mountains of sugar beets. And then I was also going to say too that sugar beets have to be dug out of the ground too. So harvest disturbs the soil quite a bit. And I think they try to leave as much residue behind as possible, and reduce soil erosion as much as possible as well. But it is invasive in the soil. And dry beans, again, another statue. This one is in Bow Island, and it's of a pinto bean, and he has a little revolver there. Always fun to drive by those. And I'm curious, maybe in the end, if you guys can say if you guys have anything that like that around you guys. So again, so that's where this picture was coming from, is Bow Island area, so just east of Tabor. Lots of dry beans growing in that area. And there are some producers there as well I'll talk about. So in this one, I'll start off with variety selection. Yeah, so there's multiple varieties of dry beans. And so picking the ones that grow the best in the environment that the growers are growing is important. And in particular, the length of heat and growing degree days that crop is going to need to mature, so that you pick one that you can actually harvest. Sometimes around here, we'll get early snow, and And so we're trying to harvest before the snow really comes and then the temperatures drop. And also for marketing as well. So depending on where you wanted to sell and how you want to market those beans, you want to pick the right variety for those. Seed bed preparation. So there does need to be tillage to prepare the soil structure for a firm seed bed. No-till and reduced till are used where applicable. Again, depending on the soil texture, but definitely. So dry beans are small in stature; they grow low to the soil, and so you want to have a seed bed that is fairly smooth and uniform, so that you're not picking up any rocks and dirt clumps. So one thing that I found was having corn before dry beans. It'd be definitely important to prepare that soil so that you don't have any big clods when you come to harvest. So they are a legume, so they do fix nitrogen from the atmosphere themselves, but I noticed I found that they do need some nitrogen. It was approximately anywhere from 40 to 80 pounds per acre of nitrogen seemed to increase yields and the beans in general. Herbicides are limited for these crops. So it's important that the tillage helps with reducing the weed population before seeding and helping that crop get off to a good start. There are some chemicals, but again, it's limited. So it gets a little difficult for farmers to control some weeds. And they also do have insects that can impact them. So again, that wireworm shows up for these ones. There's also a seed corn maggot, grasshoppers, and pea aphid. So depending on the year and the climate too. So grasshoppers, this year we had a really dry season and grasshoppers really like to dry. So we had quite a few issues with grasshoppers, mainly on our dry land, but we were seeing some of them on our irrigated too. And depending on the crop, they might really like the beans. So that could be a tough one. Rotation is also important. Again, 3 or more years to decrease that disease buildup in the soil. Again, I think lots of guys are trying to push those rotations as much as they can, but it's hard too, right? Because these crops are so high value, you want to grow them as much as you can, but there's definitely more research and importance being put on lengthening that rotation, so we can get lots of root rots and white mold, that sclerotinia I was talking about. The canopy can close in and again become very, very humid. This year on some of our land, on our irrigated, we did see some white mold in some of our lentils that came in. And I found that soybeans, canola, potatoes, or sunflower are poor rotation choices for beans. Some of that you can imagine with the soybeans and the potatoes, they're going to leave this similar diseases in the field and impact one another. And seed quality is very important. So the visual aesthetic of the crop is very important, and also the color. So that's for markets and consumers, right? They want to see a really nice looking bean that's not cracked or has like soil tag or soil bleaching on it. So those are some of the important things that consumers are looking for, and it can make harvest and those kind of things a little more difficult, right? You have to have your settings on your combine properly and make sure that you're harvesting at the right time and those kind of things. And we'll get into harvesting just a little bit. So there's a couple different methods depending on farmers' capabilities or preferences. So soybeans or dry beans can be undercut, which I think is more of soil disturbance or creates more soil disturbance because I think they drag a bar and they'll actually get under the plants and put them onto a conveyor that puts them into a windrow. So it allows them to dry and mature and then be picked up by another implement later. There's windrowing and swathing as well. So the swathing is, again, they'll come in with a cutter, they'll cut those beans and put them into rows that are left, and then come back and use a combine afterwards. And then there's also straight cut combining, where you just come in with combine right away and just cut those beans off. And yeah, like I said, the beans are so low growing that some care and consideration needs to be taken, especially for the straight cut, where your header could be damaged quite a bit, or your swather as well by debris or rocks. And the producer that I mentioned is the Viterra bean plant in Bow Island, quite a large producer. That leads me on to mint. I don't have a whole bunch of information on mint. It's grown in small acres, and it's grown in the Bow Island area. And also most of Canada's mint is grown in Alberta as well. Spearmint grows from cuttings and is perennial. Farmers will have a 5-year crop, and then they'll take it out of rotation and they'll grow something else. So in order to plant those cuttings, they have to have a special machine. And I think lots of the time they'll have people on the back of that machine taking the cuttings and putting them into a tube or some sort of implement to actually put those into the ground. So a bit labor intensive. From what I read, it's tricky to grow. So it needs lots of water. I know in our area, we do have wild mint, but most of the time it's growing down in the river bottom, right near a river. So it needs quite a bit of water, and supposedly needs quite a bit of fertilizer as well. There are a couple processors in the Bow Island area. So the Thacker's Farm and Essential Oil Company are big producers. And I think the Thacker's probably are the biggest grower of mint in the area. And they also grow other crops too. They're quite specialized. And I can tell you, driving by Bow Island when they're harvesting or when the mint is smelling good is a real treat. We'll get into corn a bit. So there's quite a bit of corn grown in Alberta. And that's why I kind of zoomed out on the map there. It's grown Southern Alberta and up into the north as well. There are lots of feedlots in Southern Alberta, so around Lethbridge in particular. And I think we have what we call like a feedlot alley. And so here's Lethbridge, and so to the north of Lethbridge and like over into Picture Butte, quite a large concentration of feedlots. And one kind of side note is we know that it's going to snow or the weather is going to turn cold when we start smelling the feedlots, because we get a north wind, and that usually means in the fall anyways that there's rain or cold weather coming. And then there's also quite a few feedlots over near Vauxhall area as well. And then this just kind of gives you a sense for where the corn is grown in Canada. So actually not as much corn in the prairie provinces as over in like Ontario and Quebec. They grow quite a bit of corn and are definitely masters at it. And we do have clients from Manitoba, Ontario that we do trials with, and they're trying to bring over corn varieties into Southern Alberta. 3 types of corn. So we have sweet corn that we can eat. There's grain corn and there's silage corn. So the grain corn and silage corn are going for feed. So we have Tabor sweet corn that's pretty famous in the area. So they grow lots of sweet corn over in Tabor. And like I was saying, there's an abundance of feedlots. So the feedlots are really producing lots of corn for silage to feed their animals. And like I was saying, there's been quite a bit of work, and in my program, in my my research, I do a lot of contract corn trials. And with those companies, they're trying to bring more earlier maturing varieties here because we have a shorter growing season. So they're really trying to improve the genetics and have corn that can grow quite a bit quicker, but still produce the feed quality and tonnage that we want. Seed prep is also vital so that we can get the right depth with the corn. Lots of the time planters, like those row crop planters, are used to space the corn plants. So because you can see they have quite a large stalk and they need a bit of area between seeds. And the soil needs to be warm. The corn doesn't really like cold soils, and if you plant a little too early, they start to not really grow as healthy and can get rots and just not grow as well. So usually around here, we're seeding the second week of May when the soils are warm, and we know that there's going to be longer or a longer period of warmth too, so that the coming weeks after seeding are actually going to be warm as well. We target 30-inch row spacing and 30 to 35,000 plants per acre. Corn needs 100 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, depending on the level of background soil nitrogen that you have. So lots of the time, split applications are utilized. So when growers will go in and till, usually they'll spread some nutrients before, then they'll till, and then they can top up in the spring or in crop with a liquid fertilizer or something of the sorts. Special harvesting equipment is needed, so silage equipment that can handle the large volume of corn stalks is needed to harvest. And again, we have soil erosion, so corn is another large culprit of soil erosion. And again, with the high winds that we have, we get quite a bit of this, especially with the silage too, right? Like there's not a lot of residue going back onto the soil, so that soil is left bare. And then sometimes what will happen too is the corn has large root balls that it makes, and once they get loosened by the wind, they can tip over and produce loose soil that's susceptible to the wind. And Farming Smarter is realizing this. A lot of people are realizing this because it's a huge cost to dig out and remove all that soil, and it's actually illegal too. There's laws against having too much soil blowing from pieces of land. So we hopefully are going to be doing some research into trying to figure out with like some of the potatoes and corn and some of these other crops, like how can we help to minimize the erosion. And we're looking into cover cropping and stuff like that. Hopefully bringing back some attention to shelter belts, so any kind of trees or brush that can be planted to reduce the impact of the wind, maybe strip cropping and other kinds of things. Yeah, because this is a big problem, and for farmers too, right? That blowing soil is reducing the fertility and causing lots of troubles. So hopefully we can be part of helping the farmers around here with that. And we'll get into forage crops. So there's multiple different kinds of forage crops, and we actually have a forage crop manual here in Alberta that goes through multiple different crops and how to manage them and things like that. So I just wanted to pick one, and so I picked barley. and it's not grown on really large amount of acres, but it is definitely grown for silage, for feed for cattle, and is still important to Southern Alberta and also Northern Alberta as well. In Northern Alberta, they have a lot of cattle as well, and grow it for forage. So again, that's why I kind of zoomed out on this map. Barley silage is grown throughout Alberta. It's largely used for silage, but also we do have malting barley around us as well. And Alberta has a thriving brewing industry. A lot of smaller microbreweries have been popping up and are popular. So lots of the time, feedlot cattle producers are going to be growing barley for feed near the feedlots, and this equals a lot of manured fields, because you have a lot of cattle, they have a lot of excess manure, so they use the manure on their fields. And it's a law that if you are spreading manure, that you do have to incorporate or till the manure into the soil so many days after spreading that manure. So there is tillage that happens there. And once that field is tilled, they can be rolled. So it's not a very good picture, but you can see here that we're dragging a roller behind the tractor. And we actually had a study here at Farming Smarter where we're rolling the crop at different crop stages to see what kind of impact that has on the crop. Because after you can roll before you plant, so after you incorporate the manure, you can roll right after seeding, or you can roll through the crop stages. And we found that actually rolling in the earlier crop stages before that crop gets into the node stages, or that elongation stage, that is better. It does not harm the crop as much to roll when it's just in the earlier stages. And so these farmers are rolling the fields so that they again smooth out the field and push any rocks or break up any dirt clods, so that when they come in with their silage header, they can drop that header as low as they can and get as much biomass and production from that field to feed their cattle. Yeah, so that was an interesting study. That study is actually morphed into a larger study, so we can look at soft white wheat as well. And we're going to put that study in 3 different areas to get different climates and environments to hopefully again help the farmers with their barley production. High seeding rates for silage. So we have 150 to 200 seeds per meter squared for malting, and then we have 350 to 400 seeds per meter squared for silage. And we're at a higher end for N. We're at 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre for that crop to thrive. And again, produce as much biomass as possible. Like corn, you need silage equipment or a combine for malting barley. So you can see at that top left picture there, you have a silage chopper that chops and puts that silage into a truck to be hauled. And then it's usually hauled to a pit, like in that lower picture there, and packed with a large tractor. And or also that silage can be put into bags and then it's left to ferment and create its nutrients for the cows. Yeah, and with that, hopefully no one fell asleep in the last half, but and hopefully I did justice to those crops and just how much management and stuff goes into them. And thank you, I appreciate it. And this
Thanks
is a picture
very
of
much.
my 2 returning students this year.
Oh, good. It's always good to have people back. It
Yeah.
helps with consistency. Listen, Trevor, thanks very much. I'll get you to stop screen sharing so we can open up the windows a little bit, the Hollywood squares as we call it. We've got some good questions in the chat, and I'd like to go through. So you may want to take a drink of water before we
Totally.
start here.
Yeah. I'm surprised that I basically went the full hour. I wasn't sure how I was going to do.
So the first one is a foodie type question, and it came from Maria Emilia, and it deals with the picture of the three outputs from potatoes, and it was the
Yep.
picture on the left, and she wants to know what's the name of that dish.
On the left, oh, that is, that's a baked potato that we would call it. So it's put in the oven and baked until it's soft, and then you put all sorts of scrumptious things on it. So we have some bacon bits on there, some chives, dollop of sour cream, and yeah, it is very, very good. Sometimes you also get so you can just get like a baked potato and put that on there, or sometimes you can get a double baked potato. Well, they'll pull that out of the oven, scoop out the innards, and bake it again, and then put it back in and mix all sorts with it. So yeah.
You have the recipe, do you, Trevor? That would be great.
I don't, but I do love potatoes. That's steak and potatoes is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Because potatoes too, they have lots of nutrients. They are nutrient packed. Hey, so back in the past there, settlers and pioneers, I think more over in the east, were growing potatoes because it was very nutrient rich, and I think it was helping with some of the diseases that were going on. I might be wrong, but I think scurvy maybe, or something like that. It was helping with. So they are very healthy. Maybe not in the chip form and with lots of sodium and whatnot, but they are still very, very nutritious.
Oh, come on. You got to go for the fries. My goodness.
Yeah.
There's a question from Wayne here, but I'm going to just postpone it because it's a question to everybody regarding how we refer to certain measurements here. My question to you, Trevor, and it's a question that is close to my heart because I've grown potatoes in my little planter box in my backyard 2 years in a row, and I want to rotate. So what's a typical rotation for potatoes?
Oh man, that's probably some of the information that I don't really know. Yeah, I can probably say just for like diseases, you're probably not going to be wanting to grow soybeans, dry beans, those kind of crops that bring in like the sclerotinia. Also, canola probably is not very good for that because similar diseases. So probably your cereals are probably okay. That's about as much as I know.
What about
But,
carrots?
Ooh, I'm not sure about that one. Yeah,
I'll leave
we do
that
have
with you for
carrots.
homework.
Yeah, for sure. We do have carrots growing in the area too. Maybe Brady knows, I'm not sure, but that gets a little more specific than what I know.
So Marcelli would like to know, what is the percentage of loss in potato crops? Do you have any idea, Trevor?
Again, that's getting pretty specific. I'm not 100% sure.
Can you find that answer as well?
I could try to Google it here quick and maybe come back to me on that one.
Okay, I'll move on to Maria Emilia. Do you use organic or ecological herbicides and fertilizers, or just chemicals? Controlling anything, I guess, is the reference to her question. Yes.
I don't think there's a lot of organic chemicals used. I think there are some people testing some of them. Like I do have a project with the Alfalfa Commission where we were trying acetic acid to desiccate their crop. I don't think that really worked out very well. It's very expensive, but like the acetic acid did a good job, but it was just too expensive. So I think lots of the time more in like orchards, stuff like that, they're using organic chemicals like acetic acid and stuff like that. But on a field scale, it just gets too cost prohibitive. So the synthetic chemicals are cheaper, lots of the time more effective. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, my personal experience would tell me there's not many. If they are trying it, it's just sort of at the early research.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always the
exactly.
desire to look at alternatives, but
Mhm.
it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And
Tulio,
definitely driven by the consumers too. I mean, like if the
yes.
consumer man is strong enough, I think we would get into it, but it's just not quite there yet.
Yeah. Tulio would like to know what is the average production of corn? I presume he's talking under irrigation in terms of yield. Is that correct, Tulio?
Tons per hectare.
That was it.
I think it was around. I think it's around 15 tons per
Per hectare?
tons per acre, and that's actually metric tons. So that's 1,000 kilograms per acre. That's 15,000 kilograms per acre. It's kind of the average.
So just multiply that by 2.5 Tulio, and that'll give you the tons or kilograms per hectare.
Yeah, I think that's what I was looking at. Yeah, in some of my trials.
Thomas would like to know about fertilizers. Do you use solid and foliar fertilizers in corn?
I think just liquid. Yeah, I'm pretty sure UAN. So liquid liquid nitrogen. And they'll usually dribble band it beside the row. I think solid fertilizers can probably stick onto the leaves or get lodged on the leaves and then burn the leaves, whereas a liquid that's put beside the row won't do that. So probably more like liquid.
What do you use in your country, Thomas?
In my country, corn use fertilizer solid and liquid.
Both.
Yes, in Argentina.
Okay,
Okay.
good, thank you. Oh, here's a good question. Maria Amelia would like to know what restoration or recovery of soils do you do after harvest, I guess, crop plantation, or when you know when it is going to be able to use the soil?
Oh man. Yeah. There's probably a lot there. I don't think there's really a lot going on. I think there are some cover crops being used and on irrigation. I think Gerbir mentioned like on dry land actually cover crops. It's just too dry to really get them established in the fall. But I think there are some guys like in potatoes that are trying to use cover crops, and that's some of the research that we hope to help with. Lots of the time, like if possible, as much residue from the crop is left behind. So like canola, wheat, the combine, lots of the time now they'll chop the straw and spread it on the soil to cover the soil. But with some of these high value crops like potatoes, dry beans, corn, there's not a lot of residue being returned back to the soil. So there's not a lot of options. Yeah, there's all sorts of other stuff going on. I think at our conference in February, there was a guy talking about some fungus that could maybe be spread on the soil and create a crust on the soil. But that's just very preliminary yet. Yeah, it's tough.
I think with restoration or recovery, I mean, you could add the basic things like you mentioned, stubble management.
Yeah.
Soil preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Crop rotation. Fertilization. Could all contribute to the restoration part of it. And I'm not sure on her second part of her question, Maria Amelia, but is this a question as to when you know you can plant? When it's going to be able to?
Yes, my question is when you use for 3 years and you want to like rest the land, how much time do you know that is going to be
Mm.
like a good soil
Mhm.
for crop?
Yeah. So
1 year, I don't know.
totally. Yeah. So after growing potatoes, they would still go back in the next year with a different crop. So they would keep cropping. Um, and to know when to put potatoes back on that field, I think sometimes there are lab tests for some diseases. So when you do soil testing, I think there are some soil tests, but I think mainly it's just been research that's gone into seeing and just experience from the farmers as well to know when to go back onto that land and how long it takes for that disease to decrease in its population. Because without that crop, like potatoes, those diseases aren't really attacking or able to grow as much. So, yeah.
Okay. Thomas would like to know, what are the barley planting densities? So I presume plants per meter or plants per square meter or seeds.
Yeah. I went off of seeds per meter squared. So for the barley silage, it's 350 to 400 seeds per meter squared. Depending on the weight of your seed. I can't remember how many pounds per acre that is. Yeah. I could try to look that up quickly for you as well,
If you could. Yeah,
you're
sure.
interested.
We're going to keep you on the fire here, though.
Okay.
Maria Paula would like to know, you do preliminary studies on the land before cultivating. I'm not sure if she's talking about research or actual farming, but to know what type of fertilizer and how much to use. So I'm assuming the quick answer is a soil test, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Soil testing is very common around here. And there's different types of soil of intensity of the soil sampling. It is common. I would also argue there is a need for more soil sampling. At some of our recent meetings with growers, they kind of expressed, like there actually could be a lot more soil sampling going on, and soil sampling is limited too in its ability to really understand the field, because you're taking one sample at one location, or you're taking a few samples and then putting them together and then sending that to the lab. It doesn't take into account the total complexity of that field, but there are other means, drone imagery and stuff like that. Lots of the time it's the knowledge of the farmer and how and the patterns of his field to really know what's happening. Yeah, but mainly soil sampling is our best bet.
Does that help? Philippe would like to know, he's interested in this comment you made about the irrigation, the move maybe towards pipes to move it.
Mhm.
And how is that going to affect the environment versus what we have? I mean, there's obviously a cost involved, but do you see that as a realistic solution? Because you're looking at trying to reduce evapotranspiration, I believe.
Yeah.
And erosion and the cost of maintenance of these canals, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, on their own, the canals actually destroy a bit of the land there and then the environment. Whereas a pipeline is put under the ground, you can put that soil back and hopefully reclaim that land. So I would think that the argument for going towards pipes is strong. I think it's much better. and much more cost effective in the future too, right? There's not as much maintenance like the other, like the canals. So you're actually saving on resources and oil and gas and those kind of things.
Philippe, did we answer your question well enough? Just give me a thumbs up.
I just have another question. It's in Canada. I don't know if it's like Chile. They have underground water, right? That
Yep.
is stretch. Yes. I think if you change to a pipeline, you are going to lose that underwater, or with the rains on the winter around the year, they are refilled.
Most of our water comes from the mountains, from the rivers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't quote me on this, but I don't think we have, at least in Western Canada, the aquifers that they have in the United States. Wayne or anybody else wants to make a comment on that, but I think I know where you're going with your question here, but I don't think it would have an impact, the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not. I think so. We do have wells. So we do have aquifers. They're quite far under the ground. So the level at which we're putting the pipelines in the grounds shouldn't affect the aquifers. And we're diverting or drawing water from the rivers and putting it into the pipeline. So we're not impacting. We're not collecting water from the land necessarily. Any rain or runoff that does go into the reservoirs and whatnot just would go into the rivers naturally anyways. And there are policies in place to make sure that there is enough water in the rivers at all times to sustain the wildlife and the habitats around those rivers as well. So there is a lot of care that's taken. And I think moving towards a pipeline would actually care for the land and the environment even more.
Because it's good, regardless if it's an open or paved or lined canal, some of it's going to evaporate and some of it's going to seep in, right? And potentially, I don't know if it can replenish the aquifer, but it's got a long ways to go to get there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Tulio, I got time for a couple more questions. We're still getting them in. Tulio wanted to know, is irrigation a problem in relation to erosion? For example, at the furrow when planting?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely, I'm trying to remember my terms for the types of erosion, but definitely when the runoff goes off of a field, it's going to be carrying soil particles with it. Depending on how intense someone's irrigating is going to kind of dictate the level of those soil particles from being taken off. And especially like in those potato kind of crops where they have those hills, and there's a lot more loose soil. There's obviously a little more potential for soil loss there through irrigation. Yeah, I think that's probably the major one. Other than that, like the irrigation, like the water is going to actually impact and create more of a crust on the soil. So probably actually help against wind erosion. So it's probably going to be mainly that water erosion, those soil particles being taken off the field through drainage.
Wind erosion used to be a really bad problem when we were doing a lot of summer fallow, which we've learned earlier in this week that the summer fallow acreage has gone down significantly and more towards direct rotations and conservation tillage and that sort of thing. I've got one more question. It's a bit political, but she's asking for an opinion. This is coming from Marcelli. Do you think the production of cereals such as wheat will increase in this period as a result of what's happening in Ukraine, since Russia is not sending more wheat to Europe, for example, to Italy? I don't know
Hmm.
how much. I don't know how much Durham, Russia's. I don't think they send much to Italy. We're one of the major suppliers of durum wheat for their pasta. And any thoughts?
Oh man,
Any crop predictions so far?
I honestly don't know that question. I haven't followed it much. I would assume that prices would probably go up here because we are producing lots and exporting lots. So probably prices will go up, which is good for our farmers. I can't speak to the specifics of that, but I assume that's what's going to happen.
80%
Awesome.
of what we produce in this country is exported somewhere in the world. And so where there's an opportunity, I think, as long as Mother Nature cooperates, we've got some great farmers that are able to produce big crops here. So I think the short answer to your question, Marcelli, is that if there's an opportunity to produce more yield to export to other countries in the world, we'll do our best.
Mm-hmm.
So Trevor, thank you very much.
Yeah,
We're at the end of our time. Thanks everybody for their questions.
Rick, can I just answer those 2 questions quickly that
sure.
I skipped over?
Mhm.
So I'm not 100% sure about the loss of potatoes, but it's probably somewhere in like the 30%. Wow, 30% seems high. Probably 10 to 20% loss. I found one thing here that says about 10% is lost before putting into storage, and then they're probably getting about the same loss in storage. Obviously, they're trying to reduce that loss as much as possible. And then for the barley seeding rate, so it's probably around 170 to 200 kilograms per hectare of seed that we plant. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks for doing the homework for us. Right on the job there. Very good, Trevor. I really appreciate your presentation. Very informative, and I think a few of us here today have learned a few things about crops growing under irrigation in Southern Alberta. So just a reminder, everybody, our next session is on Friday, March 25th, this coming Friday at 4 p.m., where we'll do a recap. We'll have a look back at what we learned from our Monday and Wednesday sessions. We'll look forward to what's coming up next week. I believe Brady's on tap to give a presentation about agriculture in his community, around his neighborhood. Ro will be giving us a Rotary message. We'll wrap up, and then of course you guys get to hang out without the oldies hanging in there to bug you. So we'll have some social time for you again. So again, thanks everybody for being here, for your engagement, your participation, and we look forward to seeing most of you on Friday. Take care. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Trevor.
Bye to everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Night.
Thank you.
Vito and Tulio, have a fun trip on your field trip.
Thank you.
That's right. There's
Thank
2 of us
you.
missing.
There'll be 2 on a field trip, right, Vito?
Thank
We're
you.
going to send some pictures.
Yes.
Make sure you sample lots of beer.
Harvey.